Hey everybody, welcome back to a brand new edition of the Bet Like No One's Watching podcast. My name is John Sullivan, and as usual, I'm here to talk about sports betting and also occasionally the DFS news of the day. And if you're not familiar with me, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @BuffaloHold'em. And the podcast that you're listening to right now also has its own Twitter. It's @BLNowPod. That's the Bet Like No One's Watching podcast. So before I get into the DFS stuff, I want to talk a little bit about my current wagering. And as I said last time, at the moment, I'm only involved in CFL wagering right now. And I have to say that it's going pretty well. Had a 2-0 week this past week, including I had a plus 135 money line winner on Calgary. Been on a bit of a hot streak. So after an 0-3 start to the season, I'm now sitting at 10-5-1 with a few games left in August. I keep all my I put all my picks and keep all my records on my Twitter page, my personal Twitter page. This actually puts me. I've been recording my picks for the last 4 years in CFL. This actually puts me at a 64% win rate over a 4-season sample size. Now, I'm not sure that's sustainable over another 4 years, but it's really nice to know that I made adjustments in my handicapping after a poor start this year and turned it around. So, the next losing streak is usually just right around the corner when you pat yourself on the back saying how good you are. I've been good this year. That doesn't mean I am good. But you take the good with the bad. And, it always amazes me how so few people handicap CFL and they kind of dismiss it. And I think the fact that it's only 4 games a week and there's only 8 teams to follow every week makes it an easier handicapping situation if you like football. So it always surprises me that a lot of the big touts and stuff don't do more CFL. Anyway, if you want to hear me talk more about CFL each week, you can listen to the Daily Fantasy CFL podcast that I record with Crazy Gaby on his Fear the Beard Media Network. But I also upload every podcast I'm involved in to my YouTube channel, which is also called Buffalo Hold'em. So if you search for that on YouTube, you'll find all my podcasts. And I always post a link on my regular Twitter page. Okay, so I'll be doing a CFL podcast in the next 24 hours or so you can stay tuned for that. But I want to move on to the DFS news of the day, and got a few comments. Today, ESPN released a very long article about the maturity of the DFS industry. If I remember correctly, it's titled "Welcome to the Big Time." For those of you that didn't read the story, basically the story is about how these companies were run, how they got to billion-dollar valuations, and why they are worth much less today. So the reason I'm talking about this article, because I haven't been able to play daily fantasy sports because I live in New York until this week, actually. But the reason I'm talking about it is I happen to be quoted twice in this article. And I was interviewed by the author almost a full year ago in regarding regarding DFS. And before I give out, my takes on all this stuff, I want to preface this by saying that ESPN and the author approached me, not the other way around. They asked me to talk about my experience playing DFS and communicating with the management of the DFS sites, and that's what we talked about. And we talked literally for several hours, so there was a lot to talk about. So I'm sure a lot of people have made comments about my quotes, and I'll get to that in a minute. But at the core of this article, it's really about how the companies were run and the minutia of that may not probably interest the casual reader. There's a lot of issues with lawyers and states and stuff. It's fairly obvious to say that they ignored the DraftKings and FanDuel ignored legal and consumer protection issues while they were growing their businesses. But I think that just saying that isn't sexy enough, even though the actual account of what DraftKings and FanDuel did in their decision making, especially in 2015, is really pretty astonishing. The example that I'm going to use from the article is that they decided to go with this marketing blitz of all those commercials, even though they received letters a month before saying they were under a federal grand jury investigation. So that's pretty astonishing, but it's really not that sexy to talk about it. So my opinion is, I guess the author wanted to embolden the piece with some quotes, and that's probably where my comments came in. My personal opinion is that my two quotes that are in the article don't really contribute much to the gist of the story at all. I had one quote about DraftKings management being like college kids at a keg party. And this was in response to my dealings with them, the context of that quote. They approached me in 2012 regarding affiliate possibilities. They knew I was a high-volume player. They approached me, and then I replied. I contacted them several times by email and called them, but they never returned my calls, and they never returned my emails after initially contacting me. They were just... I don't know, they were too busy doing other stuff instead of trying to gain, a marketing partner. So then DraftKings bought Draft Street, and Draft Street was my favorite place to play at the time. Promised all of the features of Draft Street would be incorporated into their site, and basically didn't happen. And my favorite Draft Street games and the lower rake of Draft Street were essentially lost forever. And my feedback on that also fell on deaf ears with DraftKings. So I was kind of summing that up and saying these guys are going to do what they're going to do. Bro's going to bro. So that's what that's about. And, I was surprised that the quote was put in the place in the article that it was put. But the author expressed to me that he really thought it was a great quote and he wanted to use it. Now, the other quote I put in, or I was quoted, that made the article, I didn't put it in. Had nothing to do with authoring this article. It was put in. Was about I call it the dirty little secret that players with a large bankroll and technology skills had an advantage over other players. That's the dirty little secret. Now, that has gotten a few current high-volume players upset, and one actually said it was bitter opinion and not fact. And once again, I'm going to describe the context in which this quote was taken, and this is directly related to gameplay that happened years ago. We're talking before 2010. First of all, when I was discussing a player named Kaiser Roll 13 using a sniping script on Fantasy Sports Live. And I described to the author about how I knew he was using a script because I signed up for contests literally every 24 hours of the day just to see what would happen. And he sniped my games instantly. So, and then also I told the story about how Omzi and Rudzia were a syndicate team that was first of all, they exploited the private head-to-head matchups on FanDuel, and they were also scraping contest data on FanDuel to help them bum hunt opponents. They were scraping the roster data to see who made poor roster choices and target those players. And by the way, they got caught on the private exploiting that loophole on private matchups, and they only got a 3-day suspension because they were basically the highest volume players on FanDuel at the time. Pretty outrageous. However, that stuff happened years before what's going on today. Now, even though the Max Deluri Sahil Sood 888 entry tournament happened in 2015, that still applies to my quote. all of these instances, the ones I mentioned from years ago and the Max Delury one, show bankroll and technology being used to provide an unfair advantage, with the sites doing either little about it or even refusing to acknowledge it. Now, I'm not an expert on modern GPP DFS warfare, whatever you want to call it, whatever the Fan Vice boys are calling it. I just know what I know, and I know that players broke the terms of service and were not punished for it in the past. And that's something they don't mention in the commercials. So it is what it is. I think my quotes were added to this story to make it a little more sexy. That's all there is to it. So don't read into it too much. I think Van Natter's reporting on this is excellent. And like I said, the story lacks the salacious elements to really grab the community's attention. I think most of the DFS community people are either too long didn't read or meh, nothing really to see here. But on the other hand, I think the biggest element that people are not taking away from this is that the financial position of these companies is pretty tenuous right now. That's going to affect rake. At the very least, it's going to make rake go up. And they're banking on a big football season to get them back on solid footing. If that doesn't happen, another blow up of some kind occurs, that could affect their ability to operate going forward. I think that another really interesting year is ahead for sure. And that's pretty much all I got to say on the article. I thought it was a good read. It was really long. If you want to comment me about it, get at me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you or some other means. I'm open to comment. I'm pretty amenable to have an adult discussion about it. Well, I think that's it for this episode. I'm trying to keep these at 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed listening to my ramble. And getting back to the betting, you can always check out my picks and my betting records on my personal Twitter page at Buffalo Hold'em. And again, if you want to listen to the podcasts, you can always go to my YouTube page, which is also called Buffalo Hold'em. So hopefully we'll have another one next week. So until next time, bet like no one's watching. Take care.